Mark was tired. His shoulders ached from a long day of work, and his mind was heavy with worry. Being a single dad was not easy. Every day felt like a struggle. His son, Jake, needed him, but sometimes Mark wondered if he had enough strength left to keep going. That evening, the sky was gray and cloudy, and a cold wind blew through the empty streets. Mark was walking home after picking up some groceries. Jake was at his grandmother's house for the night, and Mark hoped to get some rest once he reached their small apartment. As he crossed the bridge near the park, something caught his eye. At the far edge, near the railing, a young girl stood still. Her body was tense, and her head hung low. The street lights flickered above, casting long shadows. Mark slowed down and looked closer. She was crying. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, and her hair fell over her face, hiding her eyes. Mark's heart tightened. He knew that kind of sadness. It was the kind that made the world feel too heavy to carry. The kind he had felt many times before. For a moment, Mark thought about just walking away. After all, he was tired, and this was not his problem. But then he heard her whisper, barely audible in the wind. "I can't do this anymore." Mark's steps stopped. The words hit him hard. He took a deep breath and called out softly, "Hey, don't do anything. Please, don't jump." The girl didn't move. Mark took another step closer. His voice was gentle but steady. "Hey, I'm here. I'm not going to hurt you. Please, talk to me." The girl wiped her tears quickly, but Mark could see how scared and lost she was. She looked small and fragile, like someone who had carried too much pain for too long. Mark took out his phone and dialed 911, but he didn't press call. Instead, he kept talking to her, hoping to reach her before the situation became worse. "My name is Mark. I'm a dad. I know things can feel dark sometimes, but there is always hope. You're not alone." The girl's shoulders twitched, and she whispered back, "You don't know me." "I don't. But I want to," Mark said. "I want to help." She looked at him then, her eyes red and tired. For a moment, Mark saw a flicker of something, a glimmer of hope. "Why are you here?" Mark asked gently. She swallowed hard and said, "I'm tired. I'm so tired." Mark nodded, understanding more than she could know. "I get it. Life can be really hard. But jumping off this bridge won't fix it. It'll just make more people hurt." "Who cares about people?" she said bitterly. "No one cares about me." Mark felt a sharp pain in his chest. "I care," he said simply. The girl looked away again, and the wind picked up, making her hair fly around her face. Mark moved a little closer, carefully, making sure not to scare her. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "If you let me, I'll stay with you until help comes." She looked at him, tears starting again. "I don't want help. I just want the pain to stop." Mark nodded slowly. "I understand. I really do. But there's another way. There's always another way." Time seemed to slow as they stood there, two strangers connected by pain and hope. Mark remembered the nights he had felt like giving up, and how someone's small kindness had kept him alive. He reached out his hand. "Will you let me help you? Please?" For a long moment, the girl didn't move. Then, with trembling fingers, she took his hand. Mark pulled her gently away from the edge. Her legs felt weak, but he held her steady. She didn't fight. Instead, she leaned on him as if she had been carrying a heavy weight and was finally allowed to rest. They sat down on a nearby bench, and Mark kept talking softly, telling her about his son, Jake, and how hard life could be but how it was also full of small joys. The girl's name was Emily. Mark didn't know what the future held, but in that quiet moment, he promised himself that he would do everything he could to help her find hope again. and maybe, in helping her, he would find a little hope for himself too. The night air was cold, but Mark hardly noticed. His mind was full of questions as he sat beside Emily on the park bench. She had pulled back from the edge of the bridge, but she still looked fragile, like she might break at any moment. Mark glanced at her quietly. She was no more than 16 or 17 years old, with pale skin and dark circles under her eyes. Her clothes were simple and worn, and her hands trembled slightly as she hugged her knees to her chest. "Are you okay?" Mark asked softly. Emily didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at the ground and wiped away a tear with the back of her hand. "I'm tired," she said quietly. "Tired of everything." Mark nodded. "I understand. Sometimes life feels too hard. But I promise, there's a way through it." Emily looked up at him, her eyes searching. "How do you know?" Mark took a deep breath. "Because I've been there. I felt like giving up too." She was silent for a long moment. Then she whispered, "Why did you stop me?" Mark smiled gently. "Because you don't deserve to feel so alone. Everyone needs someone to hold on to when things get dark." Emily blinked back tears. "I don't have anyone." Mark's heart ached. "Maybe you do, but you just haven't met them yet." The park was empty except for the occasional distant sound of a car or dog barking. Mark knew they couldn't stay outside all night. Emily needed a safe place to be, even if just for a little while. "Can I take you somewhere warm?" he asked carefully. "Maybe we can talk more. Or just sit quietly." "Whatever you need." Emily hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the street behind Mark as if she was considering running away. Mark didn't press. He just waited. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. Mark smiled. "Okay. Let's go." They walked slowly across the quiet streets. Mark kept a gentle hand near Emily's back, just to make sure she didn't feel alone. The city was calm at this late hour, and the soft hum of streetlights and distant traffic made the world feel a little less empty. When they reached Mark's apartment building, he swiped his key and held the door open for Emily. She stepped inside, looking around at the small, simple home filled with books, toys, and pictures of his son. Jake's laughter echoed from the living room, and Mark's heart softened. "Do you want to meet my son?" Mark asked. Emily looked nervous but nodded. Jake came running into the hallway, his eyes wide with curiosity. He stopped when he saw Emily, but after a moment, he smiled and said, "Hi." Emily smiled back faintly. "Hi." Mark watched them carefully. It was a small step, but maybe the beginning of something good. Mark went to the kitchen and warmed up some milk for Jake while Emily sat quietly on the couch, hugging a pillow. "Do you want some food?" Mark asked gently. Emily shook her head. "Not hungry." "That's okay," Mark said. "We'll take things slow." Jake climbed onto Mark's lap, and Mark felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. His family was small, but maybe it could grow in ways he never expected. After a while, Mark sat down next to Emily. "You don't have to talk about anything you don't want to," he said. "But when you're ready, I'm here to listen." Emily looked at him, eyes shining with unshed tears. "It's just, my mom died last year. And my dad, he left. I have no one." Mark's heart clenched. He reached out and gently squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "That must be so hard." Emily nodded, biting her lip. "It is. I feel like I'm invisible to the world." Mark thought of all the times he had felt invisible, lost in the pain of his own life. And yet, here was this girl just like him standing on the edge, hoping someone would see her. "Well," Mark said, "you're not invisible to me." Emily gave a small, shaky smile. The night grew quieter, and Mark could see the exhaustion in Emily's eyes. He knew she needed rest. "You can stay here tonight," he offered. "We'll figure things out tomorrow." Emily hesitated, then nodded. Mark helped her get a blanket from the closet and made a small bed on the couch for her. Jake watched quietly, then climbed into bed himself, tired from the day. Before he went to his room, Jake looked at Emily and said softly, "Good night." Emily smiled and whispered, "Good night." Mark turned off the lights in the living room, leaving a small lamp on. He sat back down on the couch, watching Emily fall asleep. Her breathing slowed, and Mark felt a quiet hope rising inside him. Maybe this night, this rescue, was the first step toward healing, not just for Emily, but for all of them. Outside, the wind continued to blow gently, carrying away the darkness of the night. The next morning, sunlight filtered softly through the thin curtains, casting warm golden stripes across the small living room. Mark sat quietly on the worn-out couch, sipping his coffee, his eyes never leaving Emily. She was still asleep, curled up under the blanket he had given her the night before. Mark's heart was full of questions. Who was this girl, really? Why had she come to that bridge in such despair? And how could he help her find hope again? The soft sound of a door opening stirred him from his thoughts. Jake appeared, rubbing his eyes, still sleepy but cheerful. "Morning, Dad," Jake said with a small yawn. "Morning, buddy," Mark replied with a smile. "Did you sleep well?" Jake nodded and walked over to the couch, carefully not to wake Emily. Mark glanced down at the girl again. "I think she needs some rest. She's been through a lot." Jake looked curious. "Is she going to stay with us?" Mark shrugged, still unsure himself. "For now, yes. But we'll see." As Jake went to get ready for school, Mark decided it was time to talk to Emily. He didn't want to push her, but he hoped she would trust him enough to share a little of her story. When Emily finally woke up, her eyes were red, but the fear seemed a little less sharp. Mark sat beside her, careful to keep his voice soft and kind. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Emily took a deep breath. "Tired. But better." Mark nodded. "Good. You're safe here." Emily looked around the small room, her eyes landing on the family pictures on the wall. For a moment, she seemed lost in thought. "Can I tell you something?" she asked quietly. "Of course," Mark said, encouragingly. Emily hesitated, then spoke slowly. "I don't want to be a burden. I know I don't belong here." Mark's heart tightened. "You're not a burden, Emily. Everyone deserves kindness." She looked down at her hands, twisting the edge of the blanket. "My mom died last year. It was sudden. She was the only family I had." Mark listened closely, his own memories of loss rising inside him. Emily's voice broke as she continued, "After that, my dad didn't want to take care of me. He said I was too much trouble. So I ended up living with my aunt and uncle, but they didn't really want me either." Mark reached out, placing a gentle hand on hers. "That sounds very hard." Emily nodded, tears welling up. "I felt invisible, like I didn't matter." Mark thought of the nights he had spent worrying if he was enough for Jake, and how lonely he had felt after his divorce. "You matter, Emily," Mark said firmly. "More than you know." Emily's eyes searched his face. "Why are you being so kind to me?" "You don't have to." Mark smiled softly. "Because I know what it's like to feel lost. And sometimes, all it takes is one person to show they care." Emily wiped her tears, trying to smile. "Thank you." Mark felt a quiet hope growing between them. Maybe this was the start of something new, a chance for both of them to heal. Just then, Jake came back into the room, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "Mom says I need to get ready for school," he said, grinning at Emily. Emily smiled back, her eyes brighter than before. Good luck at school, Jake. Mark stood up and stretched. How about we all have breakfast together? Emily nodded, and they moved to the kitchen. Mark made pancakes while Jake helped set the table. Emily watched, looking a little more relaxed. As they ate, Mark tried to keep the conversation light, sharing funny stories about Jake's mischief. Emily laughed quietly, the sound like music in the small room. After breakfast, Emily looked at Mark hesitantly. I don't want to cause problems. I don't want to stay too long. Mark shook his head. You're not causing problems. You're part of this now. We'll figure things out together. Emily's smile grew, and for the first time in a long while, Mark saw a glimpse of hope in her eyes. Later that day, Mark took Emily to the local community center, where she could talk to someone who might help her more. Emily was nervous, but Mark stayed by her side, reassuring her that she was not alone. At the center, a kind woman named Sarah listened to Emily's story without judgment. She promised to help find a way for Emily to feel safe and supported. On the way home, Emily felt lighter. The weight she had carried for so long seemed a little less heavy. Mark watched her quietly. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but this moment, the moment she chose to share her pain, was a victory. That night, as Jake slept soundly in his room, Mark sat beside Emily on the couch. Thank you for trusting me, he said softly. Emily looked at him, eyes shining with gratitude. Thank you for saving me. Mark smiled. We saved each other. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt so alone. The days passed slowly but gently in Mark's small apartment. The quiet rhythms of everyday life began to weave around Emily like a soft, protective blanket. She still seemed fragile, but there was a new light in her eyes, a little hope shining through the cracks of her broken world. Mark watched her closely, careful not to rush or push too hard. He remembered the pain he had carried for years, the loneliness that made people want to disappear. So he gave Emily space and time, showing her kindness in small ways. One afternoon, Mark's son Jake came home from school with a backpack full of drawings. He was bubbling with energy and excitement, eager to share his latest stories. Look, Dad. I drew a picture of our family. Jake said, holding up a colorful drawing with stick figures smiling under a bright sun. Emily sat quietly on the couch, watching Jake's enthusiasm with a small smile. She hadn't said much since she arrived, but Jake's bright spirit seemed to bring a little light into the room. Mark smiled at Jake. That's a great picture, buddy. Do you want to show Emily? Jake nodded and held the drawing closer. Emily reached out and touched the paper gently. It's nice, she said softly. You're a good artist. Jake beamed. Thanks. I like drawing happy things. It makes me feel better. Emily looked at the picture again, then at Jake. Maybe I could try drawing too. Mark's heart lifted. That sounds like a great idea. The next day, Mark found some paper and crayons and set them on the small table in the living room. Emily sat down hesitantly, picking up a crayon and making soft lines on the paper. Jake sat next to her, drawing stars and smiley faces. For the first time in a long time, Emily laughed, a soft, genuine sound that filled the room with warmth. Mark watched them, feeling a quiet joy he hadn't known in months. Maybe this little family, strange and new, could help heal their broken hearts. Over the next few days, Emily and Jake grew closer. They shared stories about school, favorite movies, and silly dreams for the future. Emily even helped Jake with his homework, surprising him with her knowledge of math. One evening, as Mark cooked dinner, Emily asked quietly, "Can I ask you something?" Mark turned from the stove, wiping his hands on a towel. Of course. Emily hesitated, then said, "Why did you stop me on the bridge? Why did you care?" Mark smiled gently. "Because I saw myself in you. I've been lost before, too. I didn't want you to feel alone. Emily looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt so invisible. Like no one cared if I lived or died. Mark's heart ached. You're not invisible. You're important, Emily. To me, and to Jake. Emily looked up, tears shining. Thank you for giving me a chance. Mark nodded. Everyone deserves a chance. Days turned into weeks. Emily started going to school again, with Mark's support. It wasn't easy, there were tough days, moments when old fears crept back, but she kept trying. Mark helped Jake with his schoolwork and listened carefully when Emily talked about her dreams. She wanted to be a teacher someday, to help kids who felt lost like she once did. One rainy afternoon, Mark sat with Emily and Jake in the living room. The rain tapped gently against the window, creating a peaceful rhythm. Emily looked at Mark and said, I don't want to be a burden anymore. Mark shook his head. You're not a burden. You're family. Jake smiled and added, yeah. Families stick together. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of hope. Mark reached out and took her hand. We'll figure it out. Together. Emily smiled through her tears, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time, belonging. That night, as Mark tucked Jake into bed, he thought about how much had changed. A girl who was ready to give up was now laughing and dreaming again. And his small family, once broken and lonely, was slowly coming back to life. Mark knew there would still be challenges ahead. Life wasn't perfect, and healing took time. But in the soft glow of that quiet home, hope was growing. And sometimes, hope was enough. Life was starting to feel a little more normal in Mark's small apartment. Emily was attending school again, and the days were filled with small moments of laughter and quiet talks. Jake and Emily had grown closer, sharing secrets and jokes like true siblings. Mark often caught himself watching the two of them with a soft smile, feeling hope grow inside him. But beneath the calm, a question had been nagging at him, a question he couldn't ignore any longer. One rainy afternoon, as Emily was quietly drawing at the kitchen table, Mark decided it was time to ask. He sat down across from her, his heart pounding. Emily, he began gently, can I ask you something? Emily looked up, her eyes curious but cautious. Sure. Mark took a deep breath. How did you end up on that bridge? Why did you feel like you wanted to jump? Emily's hands froze on her paper, and for a moment, she didn't answer. Then she spoke softly, because I felt like no one wanted me. Like I didn't belong anywhere. Mark nodded slowly. I understand. But why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you reach out? Emily's eyes filled with tears. I tried. But people pushed me away. My aunt and uncle didn't want me. My dad, he disappeared after my mom died. Mark's heart tightened. I'm so sorry, Emily. She looked down, biting her lip. Then, after a pause, she said, there's something else. Something I haven't told anyone. Mark leaned in, waiting. Emily's voice trembled as she spoke. I think I might be your daughter. Mark blinked, stunned. The room felt suddenly still. What? He whispered, unable to believe his ears. Emily nodded slowly, tears rolling down her cheeks. My mom, she told me about you before she died. She said you were in my life once, a long time ago. But after she died, I lost contact with you. Mark's mind raced. Memories he had pushed away surfaced, an old love, a painful goodbye, and a daughter he never knew. Emily, Mark said softly, why didn't you tell me before? I was scared, she admitted. Scared you wouldn't want me. That you had moved on. Mark reached out, taking her hands in his. I never stopped hoping to find you. Emily looked up, eyes wide with disbelief and hope. Mark swallowed hard. I don't know why we lost each other. But I want to try. I want to be your dad. Emily's smile was shy but full of relief. Really? Really, Mark said, his voice steady. Jake, who had been listening quietly from the doorway, stepped in. So, you're my sister? Emily nodded, laughing softly. Yes, Jake. I'm your sister. Jake grinned. That's awesome. For the first time in a long time, Mark felt something heal inside him, a broken piece mended by hope and love. That evening, they sat together, sharing stories and memories. Emily told Mark about her mother, and Mark shared stories from his own past. The silence between them was no longer empty but filled with possibility. Mark knew the road ahead would be difficult. There would be questions, challenges, and moments of doubt. But now, they had each other. And that was a beginning. After the revelation that Emily was Mark's daughter, life changed in ways none of them had expected. The discovery was like a fresh breeze, exciting, but also filled with unknowns. Mark often found himself staring out the window, thinking about how much time had been lost. He wanted to make up for it, to be the father Emily needed. But he knew it wouldn't be easy. Trust had to be earned, and wounds took time to heal. Emily was still quiet most days, but she smiled more often. She helped Jake with his homework, and sometimes they played games together in the living room. Mark could see the slow but steady change in her. One afternoon, Mark invited Emily to help him fix the old bicycle parked in the corner of the apartment hallway. It was rusty and worn, but Jake loved it. Mark hoped working on the bike together might bring them closer. Emily hesitated but agreed. As they knelt by the bike, Mark handed her a small wrench. Here, he said. Try loosening this bolt. Emily's fingers trembled at first, but she managed to turn the bolt. A small smile spread across her face. You're good at this, Mark said. Emily looked up, surprised. Really? Mark nodded. You just need a little practice. They worked together in silence for a while, the sound of bolts turning and the occasional clink of tools filling the space. Mark broke the silence. You know, I wish I had been there for you sooner. Emily looked down. Me too. Mark reached out and touched her hand gently. But now, we have a chance to build something new. A family. Emily met his eyes, and for the first time, she believed it could be true. Over the next weeks, Mark and Emily spent more time together. They cooked meals, watched movies, and talked late into the night. Jake loved having a sister, and Emily slowly started to feel like she belonged. One evening, as the sun set outside, Mark and Emily sat on the small balcony, sharing a cup of tea. Do you want to tell me more about your mom? Mark asked softly. Emily nodded. She was kind. Always smiling, even when things were hard. She loved us both, I think. Mark smiled. She sounds wonderful. Emily sighed. I miss her every day. Mark put his arm around her shoulders. Me too. The two sat quietly, sharing their sadness but also their hope. The days were not always easy. Emily still struggled with feelings of fear and loneliness. Sometimes, the past felt too heavy. But Mark was patient. He reminded her that she was not alone anymore. One afternoon, Emily came home from school looking worried. Mark asked, "What's wrong?" Emily hesitated. Some kids at school, they ask about my family. I don't want to tell them the truth yet. Mark understood. That's okay. You can share when you're ready. Emily smiled faintly. Thanks. Mark realized that healing was a slow process, filled with small steps and gentle care. He felt proud of Emily's courage and grateful for the chance to be her father. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between them grew stronger. Emily's laughter returned more fully, and Mark found himself dreaming of a future filled with love and family. One day, Jake ran into the room shouting, "Dad! Emily taught me how to ride the bike." Mark looked outside to see Jake wobbling down the street, Emily cheering him on. Mark smiled, feeling a deep peace. He knew the journey wasn't over, but for the first time, he believed they could face it together. Because sometimes, the strongest bridges are the ones built with hope, love, and time. The days grew warmer as spring approached, and with the change in season came a new feeling in Mark's home, a sense of peace and belonging that had been missing for so long. Emily stood at the kitchen window, watching the trees outside bloom with fresh green leaves. She smiled softly to herself, feeling a quiet happiness she hadn't felt in years. Life was still not perfect, but for the first time, she believed things could get better. Mark entered the kitchen, holding a cup of tea, and paused when he saw Emily's expression. "You look peaceful," he said. Emily turned and smiled. "I feel peaceful." Mark sat down beside her. "That means a lot." "I'm glad." For a long moment, they both enjoyed the simple comfort of being together. "Do you remember when we first met?" Emily asked quietly. Mark nodded. "I remember pulling you back from the bridge." Emily's eyes shimmered. "I was so scared then. But you didn't give up on me." Mark smiled. "Neither did you." They had come a long way since that night, a journey filled with pain, hope, and healing. Jake ran into the room, waving a flyer excitedly. "Dad! There's a family day at the park this weekend. Can we all go?" Mark laughed. "That sounds like a great idea." Emily looked at Mark, a little nervous. "Do you think we could go together? As a family?" Mark reached out and took her hand. "I'd like that." The weekend arrived with bright sunshine and a gentle breeze. The park was full of families laughing, playing games, and sharing meals on blankets spread across the grass. Mark, Emily, and Jake walked slowly, taking in the sounds and smells of the lively day. Jake ran ahead to join a group of children playing soccer, while Mark and Emily found a quiet spot under a big oak tree. Emily looked around at the families and sighed softly. "I used to think I would never have this, a family like this." Mark squeezed her hand. "It's never too late." As the day went on, Emily felt the walls around her heart begin to crumble. She laughed when Jake scored a goal, and she joined in the games with other kids her age. Mark watched her with pride, remembering the scared girl he had met on the bridge just weeks before. Later, as the sun began to set, Mark, Emily, and Jake sat on a bench, sharing ice cream and stories. Emily looked at Mark. "Thank you for giving me a chance. For believing in me." Mark smiled warmly. "You've given me a chance too. To be a better father." Jake nodded, his face sticky with ice cream. "I'm glad you're my sister." Emily laughed. "Me too, Jake." The warmth of the day wrapped around them like a promise of new beginnings and second chances. That night, back at home, Emily wrote a letter to her mother. She told her about Mark, Jake, and how she was finally starting to feel like she belonged. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in a small box filled with memories. Mark found her later and asked what she was doing. "Keeping my past safe," Emily said softly. "So I can focus on the future." Mark nodded, understanding. "We're here for that future. Together." As Emily drifted to sleep that night, Mark watched over her, feeling grateful for the unexpected journey that had brought them together. The bridge where she once stood was no longer a place of fear but a memory of hope that had saved a struggling girl and a single dad, and had created a new family built on love. And in that small, quiet home, new beginnings blossomed, full of promise and light.